in which we are going to be making this lovely little sunflower wall hanging design. I've included links to all of the mosaics used in this project in the description below, so you can create exactly the same piece if you'd like to. Although of course, if you like the look of the design but you would rather have a pink or a purple background instead, for example, then by all means experiment to your heart's content. But for this project we're going to need a 20cm heart. This can actually be any shape at all, you just need to vary the pattern very slightly to suit your base. 10mm micro triangles in grass green, 8mm darling dots in medium blue, 18mm rounds in a red mix, 1cm Ottoman mixes in blue and green, miniature glass nuggets in opalescent orange and crystal green, although you can just use orange and green darling dots if you either can't find small enough nuggets or you're just finding them really hard to get hold of. Yellow petals in either glass or ceramic, personally I prefer the glass ones, as well as PVA glue, white and black grout in order to mix up some pale grey, a bowl and spoon with some water, and a cloth and a pencil and some wheeled nippers. And the first thing we're going to do is take out our heart and we're going to draw a line across it roughly halfway up. This is going to mark where the horizon is. Then, starting off from the outside of your piece, place the green Ottoman tiles randomly from the point going up the outside edge up to that halfway line that we've just drawn. Try not to use any two of the same tile next to each other, as this will really stand out and it'll be one of those things that once you've spotted it you won't be able to unsee it. Then, once the bottom half is filled, continue up around the edge, this time with the blue. Again, trying to use them as randomly as possible. Now in this mix there are quite a few greenish looking tiles, and try not to use too many of these. This is supposed to be a representation of the sky, and really it's the blue ones that we want. Don't worry about the holes for the top at the moment, we'll deal with those later on, and for now just add the second layer the same as you did the first one, with the green from the base going right up to the horizon, and then the blue going around the top. But this time, leave a gap at the point at the top and at the base. In the top one, we're going to be placing one of our 18mm red rounds. There's a good mix of different shades in this mix, and so I do find that the paler ones work a little bit best for the project. Red ones tend to stand out too much, so aim to use the orange or pinky ones if you can. But once you've got all of your tiles in the border in place, we can then move on to the sunflowers themselves. And here a little bit of style choice is going to come into the mix. As these yellow glass petals come in two different sizes, you can either have larger or smaller flowers depending on the petal size that you use. Personally, I like to mix them up as I feel it gives the flowers a little bit of a quirk to them, a bit more character having mismatched petals. But if you want to have a slightly more formal look, then by all means use just one petal size per flower. And remember of course to give each of your flowers a nice pearlized orange bead at the centre point. Once you're happy with your flower placement, and don't forget you can make any changes you like later on down the line, as we haven't glued anything down yet. And then in the gap that we've left at the base, you can place a little green glass nugget. One of the crystal ones works particularly well, although you don't have to do this certainly. If you can't get hold of one little green nugget, don't worry about it, you can just put one of the green tiles there as well. The next tiles we're going to be adding are a few more of the paler red 18mm rounds. These are to represent sunflowers in the distance, or perhaps ones that haven't opened yet. Try to arrange them roughly evenly on your backing, but don't get hung up over it. Sunflowers in a field don't arrange themselves perfectly. So long as you enjoy the arrangement, then it is absolutely ideal. And next we're going to fill in the space around the lower half of the mosaic. So we're going to be going around the flowers and we'll use the green triangles. These are obviously supposed to represent grass, but don't worry about having them all point upwards or anything like that. We just need to squeeze as many as we can onto the board while still keeping them evenly spaced apart. Make sure none of the tiles are touching each other, as again, this will stand out like a sore thumb once the piece has been grouted. Once you have the base filled with green triangles, do exactly the same as you just done with the sky, this time using the blue darling dots. Just the same as before, take care to pack in as many as you possibly can, while at the same time making sure there is an even gap all around each one and none of them are touching. And lastly, we need to make sure that those hanging holes up at the top are clear of any tiles, otherwise we're not going to be able to hang it up. And to do that, we can take the tiles which are just covering the holes and we're going to snip them in half with a pair of wheeled cutters so that we can now place them to the sides and those holes are exposed once again. And with that last job completed, that should be all of the tiles arranged, and it's time to cast a critical eye over your work, looking to see if there is anything you would like to move. And if you're happy, then it's time to stick the tiles down using the PVA. Now, with such tiny little tiles, this can be a little bit fiddly, and you might find it helps to use a pair of tweezers. But what I tend to do is I actually put a tiny little bit of glue on the tip of one finger, just enough to make it slightly tacky, and then I can use it to pick up each tile one at a time, put a blob of glue underneath and then replace the tile. The glue underneath is stickier than my tacky fingertip, and so the tile stays in place, but that's just my method. You can do whichever one works for you. One of the lovely qualities about PVA is that it takes a little while to set, and so with a small project like this, even once you've done all of the sticking, you still have time to do a little bit of tinkering before they set firmly. And so now is the time to do your final look over for anything you would like to change, or maybe just tweak the tiles around a little bit so that they lie nice and neatly next to each other. But if you've reached that stage and you are perfectly happy now, then you can place it to one side and leave the piece to set solidly. With PVA, this is likely to take a couple of hours. Once you're happy that they're dry and they're not going to be moving anywhere, then it's time to get on with the grouting. Now for this project, I want a pale grey background, and so I'm going to mix 3 parts white to 1 part black grout. Then add enough water to bind them together to make it into a thick sort of paste. And then, because we haven't made any cuts on these tiles, we don't have any sharp edges, no sharp glass or anything, then we can just apply the grout with fingers rather than using a knife or anything else. Although don't get me wrong, do use gloves if you'd rather do so. Slather the grout on though, pressing it in between all the tiles, and cover the entire piece including the edges and over the holes. The aim right now is just to get a good covering rather than for it to be neat. And then, once we've completely smothered the piece, we can use a damp cloth to remove as much of the excess as possible. While the grout is wet, you won't actually be able to remove all of it anyway, and at this stage we're looking to leave behind just a fine film. We're trying to get off as much as we can. Then use the pencil to poke the hanging holes from the back and then from the front as well, twizzling the pencil in the gap just to reinstate those holes. And now, so long as you are happy you have removed as much of the grout as possible, you can once again place it to the side for a couple of hours and leave it to dry. And here we are. It's actually been about 5 hours now and my mosaic has been sitting in the sun. It won't have dried completely yet, but it is dry on the outside. And so we can now give it its penultimate buffing. That is, we're going to rub over it with a damp cloth again, just trying to get rid of as much of that film as we possibly can. And take the time to make sure that the tiles are all showing properly. It's now time to look at all of those edges and make sure that nothing is covered in any grout that's going to distort the image. Once all the excess is removed once again, we will set them to one side, and now we're going to leave it to dry completely. Once it is, your mosaic is completed. It is ready to be hung on your wall. Just remember that as this has a wooden base, you will need to keep it in a dry environment. But with the holes already prepared up at the top, this is a lovely little wall decoration, and to me, it really sings of summer. But if there's any project you'd particularly like to see, let me know in the comments below. Anywho though, I hope you've enjoyed this little mosaic tutorial. Happy crafting everyone, and I'll see you again soon.